again, very much looking forward to this fantastic discussion. A big thanks to our guests, and I give the floor to Pieter for a more detailed presentation and for leading the discussion. Pieter, your turn. Thank you very much.
Okay, grand merci Céline pour cette invitation. I speak a little bit of French, so and I know some of our speakers also do. So what Céline said is really important. All the Francophone people, apologies to you that we cannot do this webinar in French, but do not feel shy and come with questions or remarks at the panel, at the discussion in the end. So yes, so my name is Pieter Ventevogel. I think, Pierre, can we start with the slides? I'm very happy to be here. When the invitation came, I must be honest, when Céline wrote me whether I would be willing to give a guest lecture in her fantastic series of webinars, I wanted to say no, because I do not know much about art and mental health in humanitarian settings. So I was already drafting the email, and then I realized, yeah, but actually it's a nice subject. It's so interesting. So I thought, wait a minute, I don't know much about it, but I know people who know a lot about it. So then I asked Céline, is it okay if I ask other people? And that's how we came with three really very excellent speakers who each represent one part of the big world of creative arts and mental health and psychosocial well-being. So you see the plan here. I will have a very brief introduction now. Then we go to Max, then we go to Katja, then we go to Rachel, and then the last half hour or so, we will have a discussion with all of you. And I'm really looking forward to that part as well. Next slide, please. Now, you may have noticed that in my job title even, it said Mental Health and Psychosocial Support Officer. And that needs some explanation. In humanitarian settings, we use more or less standardly the word MHPSS, which is a horrible acronym, honestly, but it's important because it shows that when the actions we do to promote mental health are not just a matter of classical mental health interventions, which in the West, how I was trained in the Netherlands as a psychiatrist, was often with individual psychotherapy, deep psychotherapy, or sometimes medication in people who have more severe mental health issues. Now that certainly is part of MHPSS, individual psychotherapy and medication, but it's absolutely not the only thing. It's much broader, and to reflect that, we use the word mental health and psychosocial support. The idea of psychosocial support indicates already that there are many things that can be done to support people in achieving good mental health outcomes and good mental psychosocial well-being. So that's why we use the word MHPSS. Next slide. Now, if you look at the evidence, and that's more and more important, we have a little bit of a problem here. The field of MHPSS in humanitarian settings, when I started as a psychiatrist 20 years ago, when I went to Afghanistan, was very new. People thought I was a little bit crazy, that I just thought I could do something around mental health in an area that was so affected by war. That has changed. MHPSS is now part of the humanitarian response. And we have lots of evidence. There is a lot of good research around that. And the German government, the Bundesministerium for Foreign Affairs, I think, I don't know, not Foreign Affairs, but anyway, the BMZ in Germany commissioned a review that was published just a month ago around the evidence for psychosocial support interventions. Not so much the medical part, but the other psychosocial support interventions. And you see here a summary slide of the studies they found. Not very many, but also not very little. And you can see the different types of intervention. So you can do things to provide people with more financial means to cope better. You can have parenting interventions, you can have health promotion interventions. So you see lots of different types of interventions, but you also see, number 3, creative expression. And they found 26 studies around creative expression. So it's coming up, creative arts as a way to achieve good mental health outcomes is coming up, but it's still very much at the beginning. And unfortunately, this review was actually meant to create a meta-analysis where you can really see, if we do this, then that leads to so many percentage of mental health improvement. Now, the state of art in the arts is not really there yet that we can do such kind of meta-analysis. So much more research is needed, but it is coming up. One problem with research around creative therapies is also that it's difficult to research it. It's smart because you have many contextual factors, as you will also hear in the talks from our colleagues. But it is an area that I think is promising. And I hope that the illustrations that we get from our guest speakers will show that as well. Next slide, please. The last slide that I want to show is this one, is that when we talk about MHPSS, we really conceptualize that as a spectrum of services. And we use the pyramid to illustrate that. Very briefly, the needs in a humanitarian setting, we think about refugees in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, Max will talk about it. You see very many people who are distressed, who are anxious, who are worried about their life, about their future. Not all people need clinical mental health interventions, but a lot need, and that's the bottom, they need to have the provision of basic services and support in ways that is conducive to mental health, in ways that is actually respectful to people, and that actually makes people feel comfortable. So there are lots of things that our colleagues in shelter, in water sanitation, in nutrition can do to make people feel comfortable. That's layer 1, the bottom layer. Then layer 2 is about strengthening what is already out there in the community. And there is a lot people can do. But of course, if you're displaced or have gone through war, a lot of those systems to help each other are affected negatively. So, but we can help people to help themselves. That's this layer 2. Then above that, you see a layer 3 called focused non-specialized support. Toujours l'autre, s'il vous plaît. You can see the focused non-specialized psychosocial support. That means you can do a lot of interventions without the use of a specialist. You can actually do a lot by trained non-specialists. That's layer 3. And then layer 4 is, yes, we need clinical mental health services, and we have too little in humanitarian settings, but we're working on that, and there are good ways, for example, by working through groups where we can actually reach more people than in classical ways. Now, the way this seminar is structured is that we start with layer 2, strengthening community and family supports, and Max Frieder will say a little bit about his work, and I think a lot of what he does fits in this layer, not everything. And then we go to layer 3, so that's focused non-specialized support, and this usually works with people who are non-specialists, who are non-specialist providers of interventions. And I think what Katja will say fits well in that area. And then, yes, specialist services can be delivered, but they do not necessarily have to be done by people with a Ph.D. in psychology. It's about practical competencies, and you can build these practical clinical competencies in ways that may be unexpected for you. That's all what I wanted to say, and I think what Rachel will tell you fits to some extent in layer 4, layer 3. Maybe Rachel doesn't fully agree, that's fine, but it's the way it is structured with different layers of intensity. So I thought that may help you to see how art and creativity can help in very different ways. Sometimes art as a way to provide therapy, sometimes also doing creative methods, and having many effects, including a better well-being. Without that, without talking more, I would like to go to the next speaker, which is Max. Next slide, please. Max Frieder is an artist and an educator. He comes from Denver in Colorado, but he's now in New York. And his work is very much focused on working with people in difficulties, including in refugee settings. He has worked in many places in the world: Israel, Palestine, Turkey, India, New Zealand, Australia, Costa Rica, well, many places, but also in refugee settings such as in Bangladesh and in Uganda. He is a creative artist, but he's also a doctor in education. He recently received his Ph.D. from Columbia University in New York. So I'm very happy to introduce him. Max, the floor is yours.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Pieter. What an incredible introduction, and just so honored and thrilled to be part of such a profound conversation. So thank you so much for welcoming me. So I thought maybe one of the strongest ways that we could start is by maybe starting with that video, which I think really shows more than I can in some ways ever say about the value of arts and education in crisis and emergency response. So Pieter, if we're able, or Pierre, if we're able to start maybe with that video, and then I can move on into my talk, if that's possible.
Okay, so I think Max is working on it. Pierre is working on it.
Okay, great. Well, until that happens, maybe I can start out by giving a little introduction on myself, and about the work that Artolution does. So, oh, great, there it is. Oh, I see that the video is about to be played. Okay, great. Yes, and if you could full screen that and turn the volume up. Thank you.
Put it on full screen if you can. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you so much, Pierre.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for showing that, Peter. So if we could go back to the slideshow. So that gives you a little bit of an entrance into a world, a window into a world, if you will. And our programs at Artolution are really rooted in being able to train local artists and educators in different refugee camps, conflict zones, and traumatized communities all over the world how to be able to facilitate their own locally led sustainable programs. And so initially it really started with myself and my co-founder, Joel Bergner, and we were doing these programs individually. And, one of the things we noticed is there's so many passionate, driven, talented folks who are living in refugee camps or places that have been affected by war, and that the talent is already there. So the question is how do we build the bridges to catalyze these folks to be able to paint murals with their own communities, to build interactive percussive sculptures out of trash and recycled materials, puppetry, performance, dance, all as a form of storytelling and trauma work. And so this mental health and psychosocial support side I'm going to bring up. So trying to start with this image. I love this image of this little boy. And I think this kind of shows what this is all about, right? Which I think a lot of times when we talk about psychology, we get really serious. But what we found is that when you're dealing with trauma, that it's so incredibly important to be able to have fun, to be able to deal with things that involve play and imagination, and to be able to have that kind of level of engagement. So I just wanted to kind of start out with that image, with that little boy. So you can go to the next slide. And so in the next slide, what you'll see is you see this one kind of facial expression. And now you look at this boy. And if you notice something, he has that exact same facial expression, right? This overwhelming joy. And we think about humanization, and in so many cases, we have such severe cases of isolation, of folks who feel, why is my life worth living? For this little boy, he actually had been through unfortunately, some experiences with being a child soldier in South Sudan. And yet you look at this, and this is not what you necessarily imagine with, the child with the flies in the eyes, but instead thinking about how can we create really inspiring images, things that can really show what is possible and creativity is able to transform this idea of humanity, autonomy, agency, efficacy. Okay, you can go to the next slide, please. And so this gives a little bit of an overview of our work, and it shows, we've worked in over actually 30 countries around the world. We've done actually over 700 different programs. But what we've done is we kind of realized that in order to be sustainable, what we really needed to do is to focus on a series of regions to actually have long-term programs. And so what's been really important for us has been focusing on the Rohingya refugee camps in Bangladesh, the South Sudanese refugee communities in Uganda, the Syrian refugee camps in Jordan, as well as focusing on the displaced Venezuelan crisis in Colombia and internally displaced people, as well as work with resettled refugees in America. So one of the big questions that we have is, what does it take to make this happen? What does it take to make a local team of local artists working with folks who've been through trauma? What do they need, and what kind of professional development do they need? What opportunities do they need to change their own communities in this locally led model? And what's happened is we've actually scaled this from being me and my partner to actually doing this. We now have over 80 artists around the world who are doing this year-round, full-time for their own communities. All right, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. And so in the next slide, one of the things that you can see is this is our timeline, and really we started doing this work in 2017, actually in 2010, and you can see we've really kind of scaled it over the last series of years. For this specific presentation, I'm going to focus on our work in East Africa, in Uganda, and our work in Bangladesh, but you can find a lot more information about our global response on our website at artolution.org. So one of the things that we found that's been so crucial is that the priorities have to come from these local artists. So when they're dealing with trauma within their context, what issues of being tabooed, stigmatized, isolated, and issues of depression or coping mechanisms, what we found is they need to find their own idioms of distress. They have to talk about it in a way they feel comfortable with, and that's really crucial when we look to how to discuss these issues. If you can go to the next slide. One of the things that we've noticed, and I wanted to bring out, is our partners matter so much. So who we're working with in order to make these projects come to life, that really is rooted in local trust. So being able to have partners like UNHCR, UNICEF, IOM, or the International Federation of the Red Cross, that they've many times been in these places for a long time. And so being able to get permissions and having that local buy-in is so crucial for being able to really build long-term relationships and partnerships that really have meaning. I can go to the next slide. Now, both with that combination of partnerships, we also need to know, what does integrity really look like? What does it look like to have a learner-centered approach, an approach that really comes from these local communities when you're dealing with that second layer that was being discussed of strengthening community and family support structures? So this is a little bit of an excerpt from my dissertation from some of the research I conducted over the last 5 years, and it really talked about this importance of cultivating a creative learning of safe spaces. How do we generate resilient responses, and how can this be transformed in understanding how we transform trauma, understanding cultural, historical influences, social spheres of relational influence, and really understanding that in order to make these differences, we need to look at it holistically. We can't look at it purely as coming in from the outside, but rather there are many times very rigorous and very comprehensive internal cultural mechanisms of dealing with trauma. And so the question becomes, how do we integrate that with cultural arts that are able to activate communities, to activate individuals, and to be able to create that type of transformation and those types of indicators that really show behavioral shifts? You can go to the next slide. And so, what that can look like is this. This is our theory of change, which we developed in collaboration with the Population Council. And when you look up close, you can see, there's a big difference between the inputs, outputs of short-term outcomes compared to mid-term outcomes, and then what really looks at is impact over a long term. So an example of an implementation of this is work that we're doing. We have a 5-year contract with North-South University in Bangladesh till 2026, doing longitudinal studies. And what we've really found is some of the biggest shifts we've seen are this idea of the shift from being a victim to becoming a survivor, and then from a survivor to becoming an agent of social change, and then transforming from that to actually becoming a maker of history. And this believing that you actually can change your history rather than just being somebody who lives in somebody else's history. And this idea of independence and autonomy is just really crucial when we look to these questions. So for those who are interested, we can give more information on this, but you see some of the specific barriers: trauma, social isolation, conflict, depression, displacement, stigma. And then we see some of the specific implications to finding specific indicators that look for what transformation can really look like. And we realize we are a complementary program. It is not just us, but us in collaboration with WASH, protection, gender-based violence prevention, etc. You can go on to the next slide. And in this next slide, this really lays out actually all of our work, which is in reality, we find that implications of community-based public art education programs need to take in an entire participant and an entire facilitator into consideration. So their emotional well-being, their social well-being, their mental and physical well-being, all are components when we look at how the arts can catalyze other pre-existing issues that have been identified by the local community and other supplemental research collaboration. So for example, if we're working with UNICEF, they may found that child marriage is a major issue. So that will inform our intervention in addition to what's actually happening within those communities themselves. So you take those two different components and you end up being able to have some really compelling strategies that are really rooted in those local communities coming up with their own solutions, and hopefully being able to then pair that with these international agencies. So this is a really good kind of map to show what that looks like. You can go to the next slide. So as you look at these different conceptions of well-being, what does this actually look like? So I'm going to walk us through a couple of actual photos to really see what this can actually manifest looking like. And so you can see this is actually in the Bidi Bidi refugee settlement, which is the largest refugee settlement in East Africa, and it's actually the largest refugee settlement in all of Africa. And so if you go to the next slide. Okay, you can see here that in this slide, you can see these kids, right? And I love this image. And one of the reasons I love this is if you notice what they're doing, they're all picking up trash. And what we do is we have a program that's called the Foundstrument Soundstrument Project. And this kind of crazy word, Foundstrument Soundstrument, what it means is getting kids, like these kids here, to learn about collecting trash, recycled materials, to learn about sustainability, the environment, upcycling, taking these pieces of trash, and then actually even putting together songs. So for example, here we came up with a song, very simple, recycle, recycle, let's recycle, right? And so you see it actually is teaching about the environment, but then it takes these different objects, and if you go to the next slide, what you can see is it takes the objects and it actually puts them together and we paint all of them. We explore what are the different sounds, what are the different ways that we can make music, that we can write songs, and what can this look like? So if you go to the next slide, it can all of a sudden become this reason for a community to come together. And this is what's called the Elephantstrument. And the Elephantstrument was created all of recycled materials built by children and adults within the local community, but then they actually created songs. We created an entire dance. They were playing on it with drumsticks. So it gives a reason for civic engagement. It gives a reason for celebration. And we all know that there's such a thirst, there's such a hunger for a reason to celebrate when there's so much trauma. Giving a reason to have something to celebrate, to have a communal gift, is so important for a feeling of self-worth and for feelings that what you do really matters as an individual and is able to really feel that they have a reason to wake up in the morning. Now, if you go to the next slide, one of the things I love is why an elephant? And we asked the children that came up with a story. They said, you know, the elephants came with us when we left South Sudan, and they actually migrated right alongside us. And we never want to forget where we came from in Wow and in Ye and in Juba. And so because of that, there's this feelings of memory, of collaboration, and about this understanding that there's cooperations connected accordingly. And I think that's important. Analogy is just as important as literal conversation about trauma. And so you can go to the next slide. So here you can see, this is an image, for example, of the water bearers and paying respect to the women who are carrying water very far distances. Then on the left, we can also see this idea of a woman becoming a doctor, which is such an important idea for behavioral ideation of the future. Now you can go to the next slide, which I think is a really a pretty wonderful example as well. So if you go to the next slide, what you can see here is this is actually so interestingly all about the equitable opportunities for boys and girls to get an education. So you see the boy and the girl over on the right, and you can see that out of their minds is coming what? But airplanes, and the airplanes are turning into birds, which are going into this person's face in the middle, and that's actually a woman who was one of the first women in all of the history of South Sudan to actually get a nursing license. She was the first nurse in 2014. And so you can see that actually those giraffes are also all made out of trash that's bolted into the wall. And you can see that's the community who was activated. And so you can see here that inside of it, the whole idea is that there, some of the kids, a little girl in the back of the room raised her hand and said, we should do giraffes because they have long necks and they can see way over all the trauma and all the war of South Sudan, and they can see to a hopeful future. So you can see that this is an analogy of really what's possible. Now, when you go to the next slide, what you can see is that these are the murals they're doing independently, completely on their own. So after the trainings based off our art curriculum and art training manual, that these are the images they have about the importance of getting an education, and that in some of these areas where children may have to walk 2, 3, 4 hours to get to school, that no matter what, their message was, even if we don't have a school bus, we always have our feet. And through our feet, we can always walk to go to school. And that's how we're going to build peace in our country. You can go to the next slide. Now, these independent murals, I think, are really important to see. These are a whole bunch of different examples. So you can see the local styles, right? The local way of being able to embrace what a mural can look like and ways of communicating it, ranging from contemporary messages about COVID and our COVID response to issues about local tradition, coming together, nutrition. So you can see many of the different options here. I can go to the next slide. And, some of these images, one of the things that we found is being able to use imagery to personify issues. So here, this is about fighting COVID and being able to create short stories. We've even been able to launch a platform called the Virtual Bridges platform, which has been so interesting to have digital exchanges to teach about important life-saving messages, as well as being able to create stop-motion animations using clay that's cut from the earth to be able to actually animate these characters to describe healthy practices within a public health perspective. I can go to the next slide. So you're dealing both with very physical ways of discussing issues, but then also ways of actually having the process be as connected as the product. And I think that's very important. And to know that these interactive storytelling workshops, the kids are the ones who are painting themselves. So when you're discussing issues, being able to turn children into advocates about important issues within their own families and communities, because they are the ones who are making the art. So rather than just looking at it, they are actually participating from very much of a participatory-based model. You can go to the next slide. So in this next slide, one of the things you can see is you can see more of these versions of COVID. And yet what's happened is UNHCR, this was a program with UNHCR, and what was found was that being able to work on the quarantine facilities was something that was really valued by our partners at ECHO. And so being able to have it where local youth and local artists are working together in a mentorship-based platform to discuss both the very physical ramifications of COVID, but also the mental health implications of COVID as well. So you can go to the next slide, which really shows this. And so in this slide, you can see that being able to both come together and know these very physical examples of, not gathering in groups, of social distancing, etc., and that really matters. But then at the same time, understanding the importance of having the ability to make referrals if there's mental health problems, if there's abuse issues, to discuss protection issues, and really making sure that our artists who are refugees receive training themselves. So being able to make sure that they are learning from colleagues at UNHCR, UNICEF, IOM, UNFPA, so they are learning the skills to share with their own communities. Now you can go to the next slide. So with this, I want to make a transfer for the final 10 minutes.
Max, it's actually slightly less than 10 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes,
it's
maybe?
possible. Yeah, 5. I can give you 6.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, you give me 6, even better. That's perfect. That's about as much time as I need to go through the Rohingya crisis. So we're right on time. So this is going to be the final part of my presentation to conclude with, which is just talking about our work in the Rohingya crisis. So you see what it looks like. It's the largest refugee camp in history. And what you can see is it's actually got 1.2 million people who live there. And so we've scaled our programs from being 2 people at the beginning of the crisis to now having over 30 Rohingya refugee artists. You can go to the next slide. So in this, what we've been able to really find is being able to have elements, as I said, of play and imagination are so important, especially because children can't have formal education. So for this, for example, we collected offcuts of fabric and had kids create costumes and masks. And you can imagine that actually what we did is when we put them in the middle of these centers, the kids threw them up in the air. And what they actually did, which was amazing, was they started to sing and to dance and to celebrate. And we had this group of actually local imams who came in who looked very strict. And then they actually came in and they started to take it and they were looking, well, what's going to happen? And they started to take the fabric and they started to throw it up and they started to sing and they started to dance. And it burst out of the local community center with the local women who were in kind of the full burqas. And then they started to sing and dance with this fabric. And you can see that it has this intergenerational source of empowerment that's coming from the communities themselves, which is just such an important part of the conversation. You can go to the next slide. And so you can see this is another example of being able to paint a Rohingya doctor and the aspirations of having a dream for the future, which is such a priority. You can go to the next slide as well. And this is Dildar, and Dildar is such a powerful story. I just wanted to make sure to share that she actually had what we call shock-based mutism, where she didn't speak for a full 9 months because of seeing her father killed and some of the trauma she witnessed of having her husband also killed when he went in Myanmar. And so what she did is when she came over, she didn't talk for 9 months, and when she worked with our program, she actually spoke for the first time ever in 9 months after she left her home in Myanmar. And her main message was to say, there are so many women across the camps who are like me, and it is my responsibility to be able to teach them to have voices for themselves, especially if they've never been in a leadership position. So this idea of women being in leadership positions is such an important component to our work, especially because all our programs are half men and half women. You can go to the next slide. And so you can see some of the examples of what these look like, talking about the importance of, for example, using clean water and soap, and using recycled materials here as well as an example of one of the murals. You can go to the next slide. You have to imagine that many of these folks had never had the opportunity to have formal education, and yet you look at an image like this, and this was all working with both Rohingya and Bengali children together in an integration-based program, which is so important to be able to have peace building that's genuinely coming from senses of encounter. And what we've seen is that being able to have this, we even had one of the little Bangladeshi boys who in the back of the room raised his hand and said, you know, I know what's happened in Myanmar. I am a Buddhist boy, and I know that there's been a major trauma and a genocide that's happened in Myanmar, and we need to treat these people like they're our brothers and sisters, and that we have the responsibility to treat them as though they are our family members. And I looked around and saw artists that they were crying. And they said, you know, it's been 30 years and nobody's ever told this to us, and yet it comes out of the mouth of an 8-year-old boy named Shumo. And we realized that the arts are a way to discuss this, for it to be a catalyst to discussing very important, you know, issues that are so hard to talk about. You can go to the next slides. I realized about 3 more minutes, so I just wanted to finish with a couple of final images. You can see here issues about understanding the importance of going to a doctor. That in itself is such an important issue that the arts are able to communicate, especially to low literacy populations. You can go to the next slide. And when you look at these images, that you can see it ranges, whether it be buildings or here, for example, UNHCR donated a school bus. And for the first time in history, we got a permit to bring adolescents out of the camp to come and work with local Bangladeshi communities. And they painted this incredible bus that takes kids to and from school every day as a physical manifestation of what's possible. You can go to the next slide. So as you see these different images, you can see these are the locally based images that are coming from these communities themselves. You can go to the next slide. Whether it be this image of having a light, the light of education, you know, that you can see on the right-hand side, or these images of female empowerment. You can go to the next slide as well. What we can see is that all of these images are starting to reflect a local style, you know, an idea of what happens if we paint latrines, you know, what could be possible. And for us, we created the first art center in the history of the Rohingya culture, which has been donated by UNHCR as well. And that sense of having a space where we belong, we've seen to have a very important implications on mental health as well. You can go to the next slide. And you know, as we look to the final images here, you know, that I would highly recommend seeing a recent article that came out from the New York Times. And in it, it really had a lot of testimonials that are coming from our artists themselves about what matters most to them. You can go to the next slide. The most important kind of messages as you're looking through these is to see that when the autonomy is given and shared with these local communities, they have so much to say. And when we look at the mental health and psychosocial support needs, the reality is we need to find unconventional modalities to incorporate the arts as a core component to crisis response globally. You can go to the next slide. These images are not just something that is decorative, but is actually transforming folks in being able to figure out, how do we show our own culture? What does physical resilience mean? And what can this mean in being able to redefine what the ultimate potential is of the arts to help within crisis and within emergency responses and supporting mental health from a locally led level? So I realize it's about 6 minutes. I'm looking at it right now, Peter, and I don't want to go over, but for those who are interested, we're glad to share this slideshow presentation. And please, you can see much more information on our website. So not to go over, I want to give respect to the other panelists. And again, thank you so much for having me on. It's just such a complete honor to be part of this dialogue. So thank you so much.
Wow, Max, that was great. Really passionate. And thanks so much for respecting the time, but also, like, I mean, I can see you doing this all in very difficult circumstances, and with your passion and drive, I think you make a lot of things possible. So the word that I got from your presentation that really resonates with me is like civic engagement, making people who are in a passive dependent situation, make them actors again. And that's so beautifully illustrated. So thank you so much. Let's move on to the next presenter, and we will get back to you, Max, later. The next presenter is Katja Verreau. She is a dance movement therapist from Canada. but she actually lives in the Netherlands, and she lived for more than 12 years in Nepal, where she also worked. So she has a lot of work experience in different settings, and her work as a dance movement therapist focuses on people who have experienced atrocities and collective or individual trauma. So she works for different organizations, the Refugee Company, Team Up, War Child, but also in a clinic, ARC, the National Psychotrauma Center in the Netherlands. And at the moment, she joins us actually from Uganda, where she is giving a workshop on her methodology for staff from War Child. So I hope the connection is good. Katja, very welcome to you. Maybe Pierre, you can already bring up the slides. Katja, are you there? Over to you, Katja.
I am.
Yes, we hear you.
I am here. Just perhaps you can hear me? That's great.
Yep.
I'm wondering if we could, for that sense of community and to get back a little bit into our bodies. And I just wanted to invite you to thank our first presenter. And one way to do this is with movement. So you can maybe, you're welcome to turn on your cameras if you want to, but if you're a panelist, I see you, but you can just maybe take your hands and you start with 1 finger, 2 fingers, 3 fingers, 4 fingers, 5 fingers, and then we have some rain clap. And then the rain subsides. 4, 3, 2, and 1. And just thank you so much. And there's a lot of overlap with the work that we're doing. And so I just also want to take some time to welcome everyone. So our welcoming online is by making a big circle with your arms. And if you are on screen, or if you feel a little bit, oh, what is happening here, you're welcome to keep the camera off, but maybe looking to your right and left side on the screen. Who are all those people? So I have Willem, my colleague, beside me. And so I also have Max under me, funny enough. And then I have Celine as well. So maybe you have people above you on screen, so you might need to move. And then maybe you can take your arms and just cross them across your chest and just giving yourself a big self-hug for being here tonight on, I think we're Wednesday evening. So just thanking yourself, thanking your body for all that you do every day. And just I'm very thankful that you're all here. So I'm wondering, there's a little delay, but can you hear me? If I can see your thumbs up, then I know you can hear me. Ah, great. So for the PowerPoint, I noticed that I had a little delay. And so Pierre, maybe for me, what helps me is that you keep switching slides every 1 minute. And that's okay for me. I'll continue my journey from there. So we can probably share screen now. And like I explained, Pierre, I'm really happy if you just keep pressing play. And as I see these slides, I will be hopefully inspired to share a little bit. So indeed, so interestingly enough, I have worked in all levels of the pyramid. And as a dance movement therapist, for me, what was very interesting and what was very valuable is how do I bring these theoretical concepts of therapy and how can I integrate them at the community level? So that's always been my biggest source of inspiration, the community and existing resources in the community. And especially when you think about dance, and we also think about our body.
Can everyone mute his microphone, the ones who are not on the call? I see some people who still haven't muted themselves. There is some background noise. See Dara Putri, if you can do that. Maybe a few more. Thank you.
So for me, my biggest source of inspiration, again, like I was explaining, was the body as a resource. And what does this have to do with displaced population? So we're probably in a time where we have the highest number of people on the move. And this, if we think about people on the move, whether we think about stressors, pre-migration stressors, during their migration stressors and post-migration stressors, a lot of these stressors can have a significant impact on their mental health. So although communities are very resilient, sometimes it's very important to support them in connecting and strengthening those existing resources within them. So for
Katja, we lost you now, I think. Maybe can you hear us, Katja? I'm not sure. Katja, are you there? Kampala, Kampala, can you hear me? I do see you, but what may help, Katja, if you put the camera off.
I just want to say, Pieter, while Katja is getting her audio back on, I just want to let you know that we do have one of our, we have our country manager who's actually chimed in from the Rohingya refugee camps live. So later on,
Great.
I did want to let you know that Shuja Udin is on the call. So later on, if we have a couple of minutes, would love for him from the field, from the Rohingya camps, to give a testimonial.
Welcome,
So,
Susa.
yeah, I'm looking forward, Katja. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure you knew about that, Pieter.
Yeah, welcome, Susa. That's great. Welcome. So we go from Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh back to Kampala. Are you still with us, Katja? Yeah. Katja, I can't hear you. Someone is trying to give you a message, but I can't see that.
But maybe some of you are seeing another slide. Can someone unmute themselves and tell me, yes, you're seeing a flock of birds. Okay, so how people connect.
Katja, we're losing you. Can you switch the camera off? I think it may help to the bandwidth, I think is not good. So I will also switch off my camera in case that helps.
Can you still hear me?
Yes. Yes, we can hear you.
Let's see if I turn my camera off. I think I've lost some of you.
It's better.
No, we're still all there. I think it's better if you take the camera off and
you still hear me?
Continue talking. Yes, we can hear you. But can you hear us? Katja, can you hear me?
I think I've lost all of you.
No, you have not, but you are not able to hear us. So I think we should perhaps move to no, we hear you. Katja, can you continue talking? Otherwise, we move to Willem, to our plan B. Your colleague Willem, who is in Amsterdam, so hopefully has a better connection. So Katja, if you can come in now, we continue with you. Otherwise, I propose that Willem prepares to take over. This is a pity, but we will make sure that your message comes through loud and clear, and we will also share the video, the PowerPoint presentations later. Willem, can I move to you?
Yes, that's fine. You can still keep on the same PowerPoint and follow the slides, please. So please share the screen with the PowerPoint. My name is Willem Vriend. I'm a colleague from Katja, working also in the Team Up program from War Child Holland. My background is in physical education and sport for development, and we have blended our experiences over the years, sport and movement and dance movement therapy from Katja's side. I'll improvise a little bit, and I hope Katja joins again with sound if that's possible. Otherwise, we'll continue. Talking about what we do in Team Up is and in general the modalities that Katja works with a lot are non-verbal modalities, meaning that we use play, we use movement, and we do not explain a lot. We demonstrate a lot, like Katja just did in a very little routine, thanking somebody, for example. So a non-verbal modality is key in our work. Using the body, being creative, let children explore ways of movement without restrictions, as you might find in more the sport side. Please continue the slides. Can you go to the next slide, please? Here we see children. We do play with children between age 6 and 18 years old. Team Up is now in various countries. Katja at the moment is in Uganda, but we also work in Holland a lot, especially during the influx of asylum seekers since 2015, but also in Colombia, Palestine, Sri Lanka, and other countries where we are planning. Please continue. This is what we have already looked at, that Pieter explained. And in Team Up, although you mentioned, well, level 3, Katja works throughout the pyramid from her experiences, from specialist services to the very bottom. In general, we place Team Up really at family and community support, but we have links with organizations. So part of our work is using movement and play with children, but at the same time, facilitators need to also learn to observe and be able to identify and refer cases to the organizations higher up in the pyramid. So we feel very much connected to level 3, but the activities themselves, we place them in level 2, family and community support. Please continue the slide. Next slide, please. This is an example of some children in Holland. The context that we work in is very different, because in some places you might find in Holland, in asylum seeker centers, children coming from more than 5 or 10 different countries. So how, and without being able to speak already Dutch. So hence again the approach of not using a lot of language, but really focusing on demonstration in the activities that we do. And you can think about dance, you can think about games, little tag games, activities that you do individually, activities that you do together, but it's always centered around movement. Please continue the slide. And these children themselves that come together, they also bring, of course, their own experiences from the countries and context they are in. Why do we do the activities that we do? Our base comes from very theoretical backgrounds, and one of them is from an article from Hopeful 2014. Sense of calming, sense of connectedness, sense of self and community, efficacy, and also a sense of hope. Very actually basic things that we can already offer and provide, and that children also feel when playing activities. Trying to use the flow, as we call it. Sometimes people might think children need to express themselves, they need to ventilate, they need to play and move on a high intensity level, but sometimes we see actually that they are in need of the opposite. They need to calm themselves down, and once they are moving in a low energy flow, they actually do calm down and are able to connect also with others. Please continue the next slide. And Katja, if you hear this and if you are able to talk, then just jump in as well, feel free. Just continue the next couple of slides. We see here some images from different countries where we play. I have to say here we see, for example, a parachute, and we see actually that we do not use a lot of material. We really like to also focus on the local context, local activities that fit into the framework of Team Up, that are still part of the movement-based approach. And those activities can often be done without any equipment. So although we sometimes use a parachute, it's not a guarantee that activities become a success because of tools that we use. Sometimes they lead to more disturbance. Please continue the next slide. This is our methodology visualized. The Team Up intervention. It's all about structured movement-based activities. We are using the body. We are moving. That's the core. On the left, briefly, the age groups. We focus on a group between 6 and 17 years old. And within that age range, we also split up 6 till 11, 12 till 17, or even we make groups in smaller age range, for example, 15, 16, 17 years old. So facilitators need to learn also to be able to differentiate. There are group sessions held once a week, sometimes twice a week for the same group. They include games, play, sports-based activities, movement and dance, body awareness, songs, and the glue, I always call it, are routines. Once a warm-up has ended, we end with the routine. We continue with some main activities. Each main activity is ended with a routine. So children clearly know where they are within the session. Sessions normally take 45 minutes to 1 hour. We do work in community centers, schools, child-friendly spaces. And here, I mean, the safe spaces have been mentioned already earlier also. But for us, it's also important that what we see is that children feel comfortable to move if they are not being observed sometimes by outsiders. So an obvious choice of a playground somewhere outside the classroom in the community might not be our first choice because of the reservations children have in terms of moving freely. So sometimes we prefer to play and move inside, so to feel also emotional safe, not having onlookers on that side. We train facilitators. They are facilitators from communities. They might have a social background, social worker background. There might be teachers. There might be people with other backgrounds, but people that really come from the communities and come from the fields. They receive training and ongoing support, and the training is also really based on doing rather than just focusing on a lot of theory. When we look at the visual itself, very briefly, around it you see 4 little circles. The importance of the context, placing the team-up intervention into the local context. This also deals with where do we play, but also what local activities are already known, and what is it that children like as well. But also context of either schools or refugee camps where they are in. Different languages coming together, children speaking different languages, not being able to understand each other, but through movement we are able to play together. That's context. We do monitor and evaluate. There are researches being done also about team up at the moment. Left and on the right bottom is child protection, child safeguarding, which are always key components in every training, but also in every session when we plan, when we evaluate throughout. And also referral system is in place. So we know, facilitators know that they have a task not just to facilitate the activities, but also to observe, identify cases and to refer it further. Team Up is about movement. We have 4 elements of group management. We offer activities not 45 minutes or 1 hour in a circle, but we offer individual activities where children play individually, where they play in couples, where they play in teams. When we are together in one circle, doing the same movement, doing the same dance, focus a lot on demonstration and build up from easy to complex, and the flow of energy is important. There's a clear structure with a clear opening, a middle and a closure part. And so there are many more little elements in that whole methodology. Please continue the next slide.
The next slide actually is a video. I don't know if this is the video you want to show. I presume so. So let's have a look at it. It's very brief about Team Up. Except that I don't hear a sound. So I think, Pierre, can you put the sound on?
And if the sound doesn't come, or if it's a bit blocked, then go to the next slide, please.
Yeah, let's go to the next slide because we have only a few minutes left, and I know it's beyond our control, but we need to keep time a little bit. So let's try to finish it in 5-6 minutes. Then we can still manage. Yeah.
That's fine, Pieter. Yeah. Katja really would like to say something, but we still don't hear you, so I will continue, Katja. Team Up is a movement-based psychosocial intervention based on guidelines that can be read. This is really our kind of theoretical base. Please continue on the next slide. Yeah. We focus a lot on resilience and psychosocial well-being, and in our work we work with 8 different themes, and they're really based on the observations of children over the years. And those themes, they are being chosen. One of the themes can be chosen by a team of facilitators, 2 or 3 facilitators that offer a 1 hour movement-based session. If they observe that there's a lot of conflict within the group of children, they might choose the theme conflict, and within an activity book, they do have an opportunity to choose activities that are linked to that particular theme of conflict. Please continue. I think this is another, not a video, but another picture as well. Here we see a picture. I think this is where Katja is in Uganda right now. what we see a lot in different contexts, also, for example, in Uganda, there's a lot of group synchrony, which is also a really part of what we do. Also that kind of sense of belonging to a group, moving together, singing together, and in many contexts it's very easy just to trigger a little bit, just to ask them what they like, how they move, how they dance, what song they know, and from there we take it on. So we integrate a lot of local activities also within the team obsession structure. Please continue. And for facilitators, it's very interesting to see actually that activities that they know and that are local are actually easily built into this team up structure as well, because they fit very well into the themes that we address. I would suggest people.
Here is then the video that Katja had prepared. So in terms of to have some time for discussion, I propose that we share the link to that video so that people can watch it at home. And Willem, if you could make just, I think that is not, yeah, I think the video already stopped. I think the slides that were there were really the concluding slides. So maybe you want to say a few words and then we move on to Rachel. So Rachel, you can prepare yourself. I want to thank you, Willem, a lot for stepping in. I want to thank you, Katja. I see you, we see you laughing, so we know you can hear us, but you cannot speak back, which is horrible.
Can you hear me now?
You are back, Katja. What happened? Welcome back.
It's the unreliability of the realities of our work in the field. But maybe we can finish all together with a small routine, 10 seconds. Is that okay? Just as we started.
Sure. I'm happy you're back.
Yeah, well, this has been my reality this week with internet. So I'd like to finish how we started, and that is giving some rain clap to Willem, because you always got my back, and that's why we work as a team. And so some rain clap for Willem, 1 finger, 2 finger, 3 finger, 4 finger, 5 finger. And maybe helping me co-regulate, down-regulate from the stress, a shake with your right hand, a shake with your left hand, shake with your head, shoulders, back, shaking all out, coming back to the here and now. Thank you so much. And I'd like to leave you with a little proverb from Haiti. Slowly, slowly, the bird builds its nest. So for me, this is really a big source of inspiration. So home, a sense of safety in your body, and the people we work with have certainly had to work hard in rebuilding their nest. But through this creative modality, we can really see this hope slowly, slowly building its nest. So big open arms, back to our circle, hugging you all, and on to the next speaker. Thank you so much. And sorry about these technicality issues.
Well, thank you, Katja. It is a pity because we hear you loud and clear now. And but anyway, Willem did a good job. Thanks very much, Willem. Thanks, Katja. It was great. Pierre has put in the link the video. I really invite you to watch it. A 3-minute video. It's really very illustrative. So I think Pierre can put up the slides while I introduce my dear colleague and friend Rachel Cohen, the last speaker of today. She is a clinical psychologist, very experienced, in practice over 30 years. And she made something of a career shift a decade ago when she founded an NGO called Common Threads. And she will explain you what that is all about, but it's interesting. She works in many different settings. She will tell you about that. Some of the same ones. Uganda, I think, is the limiting, is the country that all of you have worked in. She also has a doctorate from the University of Michigan, and she, well, she's always really a pleasure to listen to. Rachel, over to you.
Thank you so much, Pieter. And I'm really quite delighted to be here on this wonderful panel. And Katja, I want to thank you especially for giving us a little bit of chance to move, as that, I'm still moving, as that helps me to be ready for this as well. I'd like to start with just a very short video that, Pierre, I believe you have already in order. And if you would play that video for just a couple of minutes, that will introduce this talk. And again, thank you, Pieter, for such a lovely introduction. Let's see, Pierre. Oh, there you go. Thank you. And there should be sound for this as well. Sound?
You didn't hear the sound?
No, there's no sound.
Sorry, I just have
there
to...
is no sound.
Maybe we start again?
Yeah.
Or if it needs to get sorted out, I could play it later on.
Mm-hmm. We have sound.
Common Threads uses the therapeutic impact of sewing story cloths in groups to help women heal.
Women come together to share their stories and to support each other and to sew their stories in cloth and heal that way.
What you have been faced in that situation, and still now, how do you feel in your mind or in your body? What are the difficult situations?
Often they come in to the women's circles suffering from a lot of depression, feelings of helplessness, symptoms of severe stress and trauma. Just being in the group itself does an awful lot to bring them out of that isolation and to build relationships of trust and caring.
किसी से शेयर नहीं कर पा रहे थे कोई चीज़, उससे ये कि बहुत ज़्यादा ज़हनी डिप्रेशन में भी लोग मतलब थे हम लोग, तो ऐसे लगता था जैसे हमारी लाइफ ख़त्म ही हो गई है।
करते हुए बस मैं आंसू निकलते थे, मैं रोती थी और उस वक्त को याद करती थी, लेकिन बोल नहीं पाती थी, बयान नहीं कर पाती थी कि मैं कैसे बताऊंगी उस वक्त मेरे साथ क्या बीती और क्या हमारे साथ हुआ।
I always believe, trauma often stay on our brain as a picture, so that picture can, the display through the sewing, needle and thread. It can be, helpful to heal the difficulties or like a trauma.
मुझे पहचान हुई, अपनी पहचान हुई और मुझे पता चला कि वाकई मैं कुछ हूँ और ये मेरा स्किल है जो मैंने उसके बाद से उसको यूज़ किया और मैं अब काफ़ी हद तक इससे हेल्प ले रही हूँ अपने घर को, अपनी फैमिली को चलाने के लिए।
It's not just about getting the story out, yeah, but understanding the story in a new way, reframing that narrative. Once they have reduced the symptoms that get in the way of their functioning, they can go on to do amazing things. We accompany these women as they move on their journey from victims to survivors to agents of change.
Wonderful. So Pierre, if you can put up the slides again. Rachel, this was moving and really a good illustration. Over to you.
Thank you.
I think we got a good impression already, so go on.
Okay, thank you. Pierre, if you could now just begin the PowerPoint presentation, that would be great. Thank you so much. Yeah, okay. And I'll indicate to you, Pierre, when it's time for the next slide. I just want to show you what is Common Threads Project in brief, an intervention using art that is designed for women who've been subjected to the most severe forms of gender-based violence, where the psychological consequences may be quite lasting and may require specialized treatment in some cases in order for the women to heal. It is not for crisis intervention. It is a specialized, comprehensive mental health intervention at the next level for long-term transformative healing. It's an intervention that I have been piloting and studying over the last nearly a decade now. And I want to cover in this presentation what inspired this approach. I'll describe the intervention itself and its impact, and I'll show you some story cloths, just a few. Let's start, and we can go to the next slide. I want to show you what has inspired this intervention for me. It's something I sort of stumbled into quite by accident. This is the one of 36 textiles made by Esther Krinitz, a survivor of the Holocaust. And in these, she depicts the stories, the many stories of her experiences during the Nazi regime and also her survival. She does this in textiles. She was not an artist. She was actually a seamstress, and she created these textiles to show her grandchildren what had happened to her. She couldn't find the words for it. This was one of the first story cloths that I began to discover. Let's go to the next slide. And then, of course, you have a very big tradition in Chile of arpilleras that were made during the dictatorship of Pinochet. Some of these were made from the clothing of the disappeared, and they were made as an act of political defiance. They were done in secret, often with women's groups meeting in church basements. And through these story cloths, these arpilleras, much of the world was able to find out about what was happening in reality in Chile at that time. Next slide. Here's another example, which is a part of a collection of more than 3,000 story cloths made to document the experiences of women suffering during the apartheid regime in South Africa. And many depict, as this one does, experiences of gender-based violence. Next slide. This is the last example that I'm going to show you of story cloths that inspired Common Threads project before I began. And these were story cloths made by the Hmong people of Laos and Cambodia. So next slide. What is it that makes for recovery in our view? I'm sorry, I'm going to, I have a different slide. Okay, I want to share with you some basic principles that I began with as I tried to use this tradition to develop a new intervention based on this ubiquitous practice that we find all over the world, where women come together to sew their stories into cloth. As I began to work with trauma survivors over time, there were a number of basic assumptions that I began working with and were important in developing this particular intervention. One is that not only privileged people should get to have a full recovery, transformative recovery from severe forms of sexual and gender-based violence is actually possible, not just for the privileged few. And even in conflict zones, in displacement, for women who have experienced brutal gang rape and so forth, these unspeakable experiences, we can support their healing and their resilience and their right to recover fully. We need to take a broad view of recovery. It involves not just treating psychopathology, This is about joining with others, regaining one's humanity, bearing witness, doing the work of psychological reintegration, restoring a sense of self, of dignity, of meaning, and of purpose. And the second point here is that group work, I believe, is key, particularly in the healing of collective trauma. Yeah? A great hero of mine, Judith Herman, said in 1992 in a seminal book, Trauma and Recovery, she says, the solidarity of a group provides the strongest protection against terror and despair, and the strongest antidote to traumatic experience. So in our work, we work in a group setting with survivors. And then, of course, we have to understand that psychotherapy needs to be embedded in a holistic array of services. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. The next point I will explain a bit later on about the neurobiology of trauma treatment and how it provides an important rationale for non-verbally oriented treatment, such as you've been seeing today across the panel. And I've already told you about the cultural practices that led to this. I think we need, as psychologists, to listen more and more closely to this great wisdom that cultures offer us. And there you have a link to a little video that I made 10 years ago about these many instances of story cloth making across cultures. Let's go to the next slide. Here's an example of a story cloth made in one of our programs in DRC, where we call it kamba moja, which means common threads in Swahili, more or less. It's made by a young woman who was held captive and brutally raped for months. And after she escaped from this, the parents of the perpetrator and her own parents too tried to force her to marry this man. She refused and she escaped remarkably. And eventually she made her way to an organization that's our partner in this and joined one of our circles. And she said about this story cloth, you see the figure on the left-hand side, the second from the left. You'll see that it's sewn in a kind of white thread. She says, I made myself invisible because no one really sees me. So what is so useful about making story cloths that it became such a universal phenomenon across such diverse cultures? Well, of course, there is the sense of connection and solidarity with other women.
Next slide, please, Pia.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Peter, as I'm not watching the slides. So that's connection. And then emotional safety, when the hands are busy sewing and there's no eye contact expected, this allows for very free expression, often for disclosure. Think about your own experiences when you're not looking at the face of someone else. You can say a lot. And self-expression in this form, in this artistic form, when things are really hard to express, all of the most difficult things in our lives seem to defy words, yes? But using images to express can allow for a kind of unmediated self-expression. And it can be especially important for women and other survivors of political violence who have been silenced and where the trauma has also led to a kind of expressive constriction. They need to reclaim their creativity. And then there's self-regulation. Sewing is calming and rhythmic and meditative. You know this if you engage in any kind of hand sewing or other crafts work. It can even keep you in a calmer state when you're considering very painful memories. And sewing happens, hand sewing, at a very slow pace, which is the pace of trauma recovery. It cannot be rushed in order to be safe. And then there is a sense of mastery that comes when you can put your pain out there. there's a great deal of relief. And then you make something that may even be beautiful out of a horrific experience. And this helps to transform the pain. So our participants tell us. I told you I would mention a little bit, next slide, about how neurobiology, actually current research validates this ancient practice, which is something I quite love as a bit of a neurobiology nerd. Let me just say a couple of sentences about this. Of course, there are some citations down below you can look at if you're interested for more information. But just bear in mind that our nervous system is designed for survival. Trauma is held and processed in the body, in visual images, in sensations, in the autonomic nervous system. And when we are under threat, as the women in our circles have been, there are automatic shifts that occur in the body, in our neurophysiology, that change the way those experiences are processed and are stored. And we ought to use that understanding to build the kinds of treatments that may be needed in order to get past those experiences in the future. So neurobiological research, which understands these components, actually points to the importance of a nonverbal approach, which we've been hearing about throughout the panel today, with complex trauma. That is to say that the verbal centers of the brain actually shut down and go offline during the moments of trauma. And what lights up are visual centers in the brain and the sensory motor system in order to promote survival. And those are the channels we work with. Next slide. So we partner with local organizations, as you've heard from the other panelists as well. I think this is essential. We do not come in and do our own interventions in communities that we're not a part of. But local therapists we work with to co-create a program together. And we count on these local clinicians to then adapt and implement the programs designed for their own context. And we continue with mentoring and supervision throughout the implementation. Next slide. So when survivors have experienced betrayal and loss, they need to find new ways to connect and develop trust again. And a lot of energy is spent in our program on building safety and cohesion in the circle. Circles are about 12 to 15 girls or women at a time. Next slide. We also do psychoeducation about what is trauma? What has happened to me? No, you're not crazy. Your symptoms are a normal response to abnormal circumstances. What a relief that is. Next slide. We do quite a bit, as Katja was discussing, quite a bit of somatic awareness, work with the body, and processing of somatic experience as part of the trauma recovery program. Next slide. And of course, the main thing that distinguishes our intervention, the women design and sew and create and eventually speak about in story cloths in a gradual and stepped way. Next slide. And as they begin to be able to speak about these experiences, they work in smaller groups and in partners to understand this narrative. Telling the story is really just the beginning. It's not the end goal of the therapy. They discuss topics as they go along that surface, dealing with stigma, with shame, with loss, and really reframing their story, reinterpreting, not just disclosing. Next slide.
You have about 4 minutes, Rachel. I think that's fine, but just that you know, yeah.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So it's a stepped curriculum that involves all of these elements that I've just described. And so I will not go into further detail, but you can see that it's an integrative methodology. Next slide. So finally, I'd like to show you a few story clones before we run out of time. We have several prompts that we use, and one of those prompts is, this is what I need you to know. And here's a story cloth made in Ecuador. I'm going to show you 3 story cloths from our project in Ecuador. Here's the first one. And what I want to point out about this one, you see that there are soldiers on the river. This is in Colombia before we were working with refugee population in Ecuador who had fled Colombia. This is a remembered scene. A woman you see at the bottom in the red dress, she has made this story cloth. And the first part of the memory really involved this political violence that she had endured. But then you see also there's a small male figure in the foreground holding a bottle. And this is where she said, this is what I need you to know, that she was experiencing intimate partner violence. This was her husband, who was too drunk at the time to be able to help when the children were fired upon. And it's that story, the story of domestic violence, that she worked on during the intervention, primarily. Next slide. This is what I cannot say, is another one of the prompts that we use to elicit material for the story cloths. And here you see a woman who, well, you know what, I'm going to have to go on. At some point, we can discuss these in greater depth, but this is another Ecuador story cloth that led to a very complicated and remarkable healing process for the woman you see walking on that road. And finally, this is a moment I will never forget. And this is a story cloth that you saw pictured in that small video. Here are a few comments that I will let you read. Next slide, I'm sorry. Did you see? From TPO Nepal, our partner in Kathmandu. And what I want to point out here is that the results, what women taught us in these circles, beyond what we had set out to do really, was they not only overcame their symptoms, but as TPO said to us, they gained confidence to raise their voices against injustice, mentally felt more at peace and overcame depression, learned to make friends, and developed positive thinking. And we now know that several years later, these women, who some of them still meet together as their own group, also began to work in their communities on behalf of women's rights. An extraordinary outcome. Next slide. I'm going to just let you, and then you can tap these, Pierre, if you would. You have to tap the slide to get the next items to appear on the slide. I just wanted to give you a sense of some of the changes that we saw across our different projects. When we did some interview studies, this just summarizes some of the aspects of improvement that we saw in functioning. These are quotes from women in the circles, in connection with others. I'm going to let you read them. On sense of self. This is one of my favorite ones. I feel that this time is for me. I mean, I feel like I exist. Yeah. Solidarity with others. Agency. Next slide. We're almost to the end. And again, we can tap down this slide, Pierre, to show one and the next. Self-expression. Neutralizing traumatic memory. self-regulation, acquiring coping skills, and so on. Next slide. This is to say goodbye from Democratic Republic of Congo, a wonderful circle of young women. We now have teen circles also, both in Nepal and Democratic Republic of Congo, working with young teens and their babies born of rape. We invite you to visit our website or contact me for any more information that you would like. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to have been part of this panel today, and I think we'll be moving in a moment to time for discussion, questions and answers.
Yeah. Super. Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you for keeping time. That was excellent. We may put on the next slide if you wish, but otherwise we can share it as well with the articles that people can go to if they want to read more about the different approaches. But we can also put that on later. Now, we have around 20 minutes for discussion. So I think that we had the idea to have a panel discussion, but because of our technical troubles, I think it will be a little bit difficult. So I would like to ask people who want to ask a question already to indicate it in the chat box. I think definitely there will be questions. So I will just start the discussion by asking each of the panelists to indicate something, an approach or an example that from the others that resonated with you, that you thought like that is the same as what is there with me, or perhaps something where you say that's different but it's interesting. So could you very briefly react on something you have learned or seen in the other? So I would like to start with Max and then go to Katja and then go to Rachel. So Max, if you're ready, could you say something about what you've learned from the other presentations? Over to you.
Thank you so much. Katya, I loved, one of the things you said really affected me. And I think one of the things you said is, how do we get ourselves into these spaces where we can change kind of that energy level before you start, right? Being able to do deep breathing workshops or, hand gestures or doing things like facial expressions, right? Those types of things I find to be really important when we start thinking about mental health and especially the arts, which is using these kinds of performative acts to do something that can take people out of their comfort zones, or to be able to show that it's okay to be silly, it's okay to play, it's okay to have imagination. And I think once we can break down some of those boundaries, some of these really deep issues about discussing, for example, about depression or being able to discuss ways of having healthy relationships, it really breaks down those barriers. So I loved hearing that War Child Holland perspective. I thought it was really inspiring. And then I also just wanted to quickly reflect on kind of the wonderful work that Rachel presented, which to me, I just love the idea that we can take something as simple as thread and that it can tell entire stories. Right. And I think it's something that we really need to think of is how can we use really simple materials to be able to do incredibly complex and nuanced type of responses. And I think that's one of the things that I think Rachel does really phenomenally. And we try to do the same thing, which is using simple materials to discuss complex issues. And I think that's just something which is so inspiring of what creative materials can do that can really be transcendent and can create something that's really profound. So yeah, just so much respect to War Child Holland and the work that Rachel's doing. I found it really inspiring. Thank you.
Thanks, Max. That's wonderful. And then let's go to Katja. You can react on what Max just said, or otherwise come with your own reflections. It is clear that all of you actually work with local materials without high-level technology. And as we've noticed today, we shouldn't rely too much on technology. We are happy it's there, but actually just working with what's there is actually the real thing. So Katja, I hope we can hear you. Over to you to give some reflections.
So can you hear me? Just give me a nice thumbs up and okay, great. For me, what stood out is, I mean, we have so much commonalities in the approach, but one thing that's particularly striking for me is the sense of connectedness and reconnecting, not only to oneself, but to our communities and to our existing resources. And sometimes we forget that. So the arts is certainly a wonderful way, whether it's arts, music, dance, and whether it's the concept of art making or making things with your hands and storytelling. It has the power of not only bringing people together, and so reconnecting oneself also to this sense of belonging. So that's also very important, especially in the context where we work. But I had an image, it came intuitively, Rachel, and I had to remember in the emergency shelters in 2015 in Holland, the government could not cope, and suddenly we found ourselves in abandoned schools, and there were no beds, and they were just building the basic services. And some of the knitting women came in with their knitting clubs and started creating safe spaces with the women to knit. And a lot of these community-based interventions that started from the Dutch community to contribute are still existing activities for the refugees in the shelters now, because knitting brought them back to the present moment. It brought them back to working with their hands, brought them back to connecting with each other. So it really reminded me of that time 5 years ago in the shelter. So while I was busy moving toes and doing body awareness exercises with the kids and just playfully just engaging our bodies, the women next door were knitting, and as well some of the favela painters were redecorating the surfaces of the walls. Favela painters are also another organization doing similar work, Max. So I really had to think of all these things and how we're so connected in the work that we do and how it contributes to mental health, because our sense of being is also our sense of belonging and our sense of creating, and which is related to self-efficacy and agency and also hope. Hope too. So.
Super, and we are happy the connection is good, Katja. You have a lot to say and to think, so we should continue the conversation, but let's move to Rachel for a brief reflection and then open it up. I see some questions coming in, so let's make some time for the questions of the audience.
I'll be very brief, Peter. I just want to say that I think I'm tempted to offer myself to be an apprentice, both to Max and to Katja, because there's so much I can learn from you and the work that you're doing. And there is so much overlap in the use of creativity as a modality for healing. And I was struck, Max, when I saw your gorgeous slides, how beautiful you've made the spaces of the refugee camp for everyone. I mean, the vitality in those murals. So it's not just the people that create them, but how exquisitely you have transformed the environment, the whole environment in which people are living. I really find that so deeply moving. Katja, I was struck when you were speaking about and when your colleague who had to take over was speaking, how much from the photos we can see that the what you do is truly doesn't need words so much. What you're doing is communicated so clearly across cultures that even when you're working through the body as well. When you give the presentation, you're showing us in the body. I so appreciate how you work in that way. I'll let you take over, Pieter, for more questions from others.
Perfect. So I move to Celine, the big organizer of the whole course, because Celine definitely has some reflections and questions. So over to you, Celine.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of you for these really fantastic remarks. This was fascinating. At this point, I see that there are many questions in the chat box, so I will put some of them, and let you answer. So generic question, which is from myself, is, are there some specific types of arts which are more adapted to specific context, trauma, or groups? You have mentioned dance, you have mentioned painting, or yes, of course, sewing. So have you noticed some, yes, some specificities of arts depending on the context? Another question that I see on the chat is more for Rachel from Julana. Rachel, have you ever received some negative feedback regarding recreational activities like clothing and sewing, especially the one saying that this is about keeping women in their transitional gender roles? And if yes, how did you deal with that? Another question for Rachel is also about the act of stitching together, which is also viewed as an act of putting back together the pieces of one soul. And I think it came back for many of you that it was a way to reconnect to ourselves. Yes, at this point, I will let you answer so that we have a bit of time to hear you. Back to you. Maybe Rachel, and then I give the floor to the others.
Okay, I will answer the questions that were directed at me, and then for your question, Celine, maybe the others can chime in. Okay, and so in fact, sewing is a traditional domain of women, and it's one that our participants find very accessible, very natural, and we see it as a bit subversive, actually. I mean, that in fact, we take this traditional activity and flip it on its head, so that what the women are doing is finding their voice, speaking out. They're using this traditional activity in a very untraditional way to break the silence about their abuse, to find a path to empowerment, which we emphasize. It is a decidedly feminist intervention, I have to say. And we have not gotten so much, we've not gotten negative feedback about this as a traditional activity of women. I think it's a traditional activity we need to value more, and that has been undervalued. And that's my place with it. It is often misunderstood. Our program can be misunderstood in some cases because people think it is training for livelihoods, for women to stay in the sewing, you know, to improve their sewing skills and so forth. It is not that. It's all about the process of creation as opposed to the product itself. And finally, a question from my dear colleague Kim Kokic, who asks about, and I love how you put this, it is an act of piecing together the fragments of a broken heart, a broken soul, and there's something about that piecing together, that metaphor, that I think the women in our circles find very powerful, and they do resonate to exactly what you've articulated. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Maybe Katia and Max, if you're, yes, I see you. If you have, you know, things to say about the types of art.
Yeah, I think for me, what guides me is, first of all, that we ground our work in theory, so that you know the theory, you know where it's coming from. And so for me, what really helps me is an open structure. I'm using the trauma-informed principles. So I know, for instance, always making sure I'm offering choices, always making sure I'm that there are invitations to do something. There's always the possibility to say no. There's a possibility to be a witness and to observe instead of doing. Making sure that it's a shared, authentic experience to avoid the power dynamics, because when we talk about trauma, those are all the different things that are happening. And that for me, especially from a dance movement therapist, from a body-based intervention, that there's some reconnection to our felt sense. But all these arts, all these modalities, whether it's music, art making, whether it's drama or dance, all these moving along these modalities can certainly touch upon these different principles, and sometimes a more far away approach to the body is more useful, and also titrating, so breaking the experience of what we're doing in smaller steps to make it more accessible for people. So moving slowly and mindfully and considering the context in which we're working. So that's very, very, it's been very useful for me. So sometimes I don't move at all, but maybe we just write or we just draw. So moving across these modalities and using as well the existing songs and dances and arts, rituals and traditions from all the countries where I work. So that was that briefly, and certainly recognize that in Max's and Rachel's work as well.
Thank you, Max. What do you think on that? And on other question on which you would like to reflect, of course.
Sure, of course. Yeah, thank you so much, Celine. I think it's a phenomenal question. I think it's a very important question for a couple of reasons. One, I think we need to really assess the learning needs of different children and different adults. Different people learn in different ways, and different contexts have different important understandings, whether that be cognitive learning, physical learning, learning that might be oral or that might be tactile, and different learning and has different styles. And I think that's a really important component to this, that if we're talking about physical learning, a lot of times people love being able to carve out something, to make a mark that they were there, to paint what matters. But some folks have a much better time exploring their vocal traditions and being able to sing how they're feeling or being able to dance how they feel, as Katja very, very well phrased. And so whether it be a single step or a single mark or a single note, that we have to be able to approach multiple transdisciplinary approaches simultaneously. And that's one of the reasons for us, we will in a single workshop, we'll be integrating, for example, breathing workshops, dance workshops, drawing, painting, recycled sculpture. We may even have animation or video included. And then on top of all of that, we will always ask, what are the local traditions that need to be incorporated? So for example, in the Rohingya cultures, one of the things we found was that a lot of the women, if you ask to paint, they'll say, well, no, I don't paint, I'm not an artist. But the minute that you say henna, and talk about henna patterns, it's something that the women can get on board with immediately. And they'll make these gorgeous, amazing, ornate, traditional patterns because it's something that they feel comfortable with. So the question is, how do we develop a format that can discuss, number one, what's comfortable, what is appropriate, and number two, what's something that can really be initiated by our local artists and educators? So if we're for example, working in an area with local imams, and we're working with a local mosque, right? They may have specific parameters that they require the school working on that might be across the street from a madrasa. They may say you can't show any human figures, right? This has happened to us quite a few times. And then so we would ask the local artist and say, well, what would be meaningful to you? And one example is being able to create fables, folkloric fables that are referencing traditional oral traditions and stories of the Rohingya people that'll be shown through animals, right? The stories about the water buffalo or about the elephant. So we see that there are ways of taking and changing it just a little bit so it was then appropriate for the local imams who were able to support the work that we do. So to answer your question, I think all of these art forms are needed. I don't think one is more important than the other. I think we need poetry, we need dance, we need puppetry, we need murals, we need sculpture. We need all of it. And the reason why is because people all learn differently. And so the question is, how can we develop cross-disciplinary models that can really be rooted in looking at mental health holistically, and that everybody learns differently. Different people are going to interact differently. So I would say we need to find ways to support them simultaneously. But I think it's a fantastic question, Celine, and thank you for posing it.
Thank you so much, Max. This is really great. I see that we still have Susan, the artist from Bangladesh, if I'm right. So maybe, I would like to give for the few minutes the floor to Susan. Are you here?
So I know Shuja was here. I don't know if he had just gotten kicked out because there was a power outage in Bangladesh right now. I hope he can get off get on before we all get off. So I'm gonna send him a phone call. But I can see he just got kicked off. So we'll see if I can get him back on. But thank you so much, Celine. I'll give him a quick phone call.
Okay. So maybe in the meantime, I can briefly give the floor to Pieter, because you mentioned the fact that it would be really important that art therapy is incorporated as a core response to conflict. Yeah. So how to move forward to make that happen? Because it's not the case, as you mentioned, it's not enough the case.
I think, thank you very much. This is a very relevant question to me, and it's also at the right address, because I am, of course, in UNHCR a policymaker, and to be very honest, I have not engaged very much with creative therapy because I didn't know so much about it. And you sometimes also think, yeah, it's nice, but is it really? It's not the real thing. The real thing is something else that we psychologists and psychiatrists make in our psychological and talking interventions. And I think what we need to do is to have people who are good narrators, like the three speakers we had here, and have also thought about the methodology, give them the floor to explain what they do and why they do it, because then actually the story isn't difficult to tell. Everyone here now says, oh yes, but this is important, this makes so much sense. So I think we need to get that out as a first step. And as a second step, we need, of course, to have evidence. We have evidence, and evidence doesn't mean a randomized controlled trial, although Katja, you and Willem, you are involved in randomized controlled trials, so it is possible, and I know that also Rachel has done research work on it, but I think it's important to not say it's something, oh, we just try something and it's just nice, but we need to show its effectiveness. And that can be done through qualitative methods, by listening to the stories of change in people. And there are many ways we can document it, but it must be documented. It's not just the doing it, it's also the documenting it. And I take it, yes, I take it to heart that people in humanitarian agencies that have some influence in policies need also to not forget this, because it is a little bit it's not where the power is. The power is not with the artists and the creative people, so they tend to be overlooked, and we need to change that a little bit. That's what I would say.
If I can chime in real quick, Pieter, I have Shuja, who has been kicked off of this platform, but I have him on my phone, so I can put him on the speaker to quickly just say something from the Rohingya camps. Shuja? Shuja, are you there? Okay, go ahead. I think people can all hear you. So if you could just give a couple minutes on why art matters for trauma coming from the Rohingya camps, and just give a little bit of a reflection on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Max, and thank you, everyone. Those who are listening.
Shuja, can you mute? Shuja, please, can you mute everything besides what you're saying so that we don't hear you? All that we need to hear is your voice. Thank you so much, okay? Otherwise, we hear a lot of... So please mute the computer. Thank you. So, go ahead, Shuja.
Hello. Go ahead, Shuja. Yes. Thank you. Thanks all of you, those who are listening me. And I'm here at Cox's Bazar. It's in southern part of the area where exactly trauma had happened, where people are re-traumatized, where people went through the ethnic cleansing and went through the genocide. So me, myself, when I joined Artolution, I went through trauma because I conducted more than 300 interviews, those who have saw the mass grave and also the witness of ethnic cleansing. So right after, before in 21 March, when the same thing had happened, at Rohingya camp, and where more than 10,000 people displaced and more than 400 people are still uncounted, and they are completely missing, and more than 11 people are completely died. So what exactly art are doing there? So in that content, a group of Rohingya artists, those who were working, went through the trauma. They are the people, they are providing the psychosocial first aid to the people, and they are the people those who are providing the psychosocial support on the ground as in completely as in life-changing aid. So this is completely very, very different in important things we feel. So one of our artists, if I quote, his name is Mohammed Noor, he said, art is not, when I am drawing, it's kind of, I'm getting my motherland. So I'm not drawing, I'm basically raising my boys, and this is completely my life. Who brutally tortured by the military and was 70 days was hospitalized inside in Myanmar. And right now he's providing the PSS and psychological first aid to the people. So they are the host community and also the Rohingya community artists, those who are every day right now knocking door to door, even during the time of where everyone are living under the sky and everyone right now living under the fear of the fire. So this is completely how the art really changing every single moment of us. I was traumatized. Right now I feel very happy. I'm really providing the psychosocial support to the people. And this is really, art is completely really working here. And our artist is working. Even in 21st March, we have seen that one of the boys who have lost his two brothers inside in Myanmar. And when they are inside in the camp, and he lost his another one brothers inside in the camp in 21 March. And right now he's living along with his three brothers, but he doesn't know her mom is looking for his brothers. But he is, when first we saw the smile of him, when he draw his house, he's rebuilding. So this is completely something working as an hope and inspirations for us, for the peoples, and for the community, and for the people those who are living here. So I'd like to thank everyone those who are listening us, and this is something amazing things when every day is a single is a new things and new challenge. So what do we want? We want your support, everyone's support, so that we want to make a bigger team, because our artists feel this is not drawing. This is something which is providing them food, and they have a problem of getting ration, and they have a problem of they don't have any language. So this is kind of their language.
So Shuja, thank you so much for that. I'm just realizing on the time that we have, but I hope everybody was able to hear that, get a little bit of an impression of hearing from the ground, which I think is so important to hear from the folks who are experiencing these programs themselves. So I hope that was that you were able to hear that, and would love to involve Shuja more in future opportunities. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Max, and thank you so much to Shuja for these words. I hope that everybody was able to hear. We are at the end of our panel, so I don't want to take too much of the time of everybody. But quickly, what I take from this panel was that it was really extremely helpful for all of us, I think, because as I think some of you said, art is really the strongest antidote to traumatic experience. And that was really very clear in all your intervention. And I also take the fact that it needs to be grounded in methodology, in theory. There is a need to consider the context, of course, the different types of arts, of course, the persons themselves, but it has so much positive benefits that it needs to be, we need to work to make it at the core of the response, including the political response to conflict. And I will just take the sentence that I think Rachel mentioned in her intervention. I feel like I exist. I think it's summarized in a way all what you have said and all what you are doing. So I would like to very much thank you, all of you, for joining us today, for this very multidisciplinary, multi-geographical panel. A big thank to Pieter, because Pieter was really the reason why you were all here today. So thank you so much, Pieter, for making this happening. Thank you, of course, to Pierre, because the challenge are not minimal with new technologies. And of course, thank you, Max, Katia, Rachel, all of you, and all the participants for attending this very special and outstanding panel. So big thank to you, and I'm very much looking forward to continuing the discussion. We have students, and as Pieter said, we need now to be more evidence. We need more evidence. We need more studies. So please, the next generation, you are here. Take it up for you as a challenge. Thank you so much to all of you.
Thank you very much.
And have a good night. Thank you. Merci.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
What an incredible
Great to be
conversation.
here.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to leave this meeting now as I have to rush to a group
Thank you,
of training.
Katia.
Yeah, thank you.
Merci,
Bye,
Willem.
Katia. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Willem. I forgot to.
Bye, Willem.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Yeah.
Peter.
Thank you, Celine, for the invitation. Thanks to
Thank you.
Good
everyone.
luck with the
Good.
program,
No.
Celine. Ciao, Max.
Bye, Peter.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye, Willem. So nice to meet you.
No, we keep in touch. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yes, bye. Thank you for all that work, the hard work, everyone. Bye-bye.
Refugee children have experienced things that no child should endure. They have been exposed to war, violence, and oppression.